We're back for the second day of the Commonwealth's presentation, so without delay, we're going to turn it right over to you, Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Drew, members of the panel. Welcome back. Today, I am joined once again by Brian Oles of the Bureau of Labor Relations, and today I have Executive Deputy Secretary Pete Tartline. He will do a presentation after our first presentation on the Commonwealth's budget. Sitting at the witness table today is Michael Nadal with PFM. Michael has testified as an expert in over 100 cases, and many of you might recognize him here today. In addition to those 100 cases, he has testified on behalf of the Commonwealth, and I believe as many as 10 other cases. This morning, he will present twice today. This morning, a State of the States presentation. This afternoon, he will do a wage comparison analysis for the panel. So without delay and without objection, I would present Michael Nadal as the Commonwealth's economic expert.
Good morning, sir.
At this point in time, I would recognize Mr. Nadal as being someone who testifies as an expert for a living, and is like a bad penny and keeps showing up. But he does know what he's talking about, and I would accept him on behalf of the Pscoa as what he is. Thank you.
All right, we'll accept the expert designation. We'll see about the bad penny. Mr. Nadal, your last name is N-A-D-O-L?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Go ahead and start the presentation. This morning, I'll be talking about what we are seeing around the country, what a range of analysts are seeing nationwide in terms of fiscal pressures facing state governments generally. Following this relatively brief presentation, the Commonwealth's witness will detail some of the specific factors and way these trends are applying to Pennsylvania. But much of what we're seeing here shares commonalities with pressures being felt around the country. And to help understand those underlying dynamics, I'm starting on slide 1 with a few excerpts from the major independent Wall Street credit rating agencies that are looking at the calendar year ahead that we're now in 2011 and moving into the 2012 budget season, and are citing this as, in many ways, the most difficult year yet since the economic downturn began in 2007. And to some degree that might be counterintuitive, because the recession itself technically bottomed out in 2009. We're starting to see some positive job creation nationally. State tax revenues seem to have bottomed out as well, and are improving just a little bit around the country. But in spite of those superficial positive signs, what Moody's is saying is, again, this may be, and I'm quoting, the most difficult budget season of the downturn. States will not grow their way out of budget gaps. Fitch Ratings is talking about fiscal 2012 being, I quote, for many arguably the most difficult fiscal year since the downturn began. And Standard & Poor's is talking about over $100 billion in carry-forward deficits, as much as 20% of total state budgets heading into the new fiscal year. So what I'll be addressing this morning is why that's the case in spite of some of the other more positive signals in the economy. For those of you who may be skeptical about the Wall Street rating agencies, this view is pretty widely shared. There's another excerpt here on slide 2 from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, independent think tank that focuses on low income and poverty issues. And they too are seeing that because of a range of factors, over $100 billion in deficits are being forecast across more than 40 states heading into fiscal 2012. And as a consequence, most of the nation's governor's new budget proposals reflect this, and again I quote, grim fiscal reality. So turning to slide 3, the specific factors that are really contributing to this, again, somewhat counterintuitive, toughest year yet, are as follows. First, while the national economy is showing some positive signs of recovery, the depth and severity of the recession that we're still coming out of was so extreme that it's going to take years for the labor market, the housing market, overall economic production to get back to where it was. And even as that hopefully happens, and even if positive growth in the economy is sustained, there are a number of structural factors, which I'll address, that lead state tax revenues to lag overall economic recovery. Compounding that challenge, we've seen the phase out of very significant federal stimulus dollars that were helping to prop up many state budgets during the toughest years of economic downturn. And with that stimulus spending going away and not anticipated to recur, and as reserves and rainy day funds have been drawn down and depleted through the worst of the economic recession, there are fewer resources available with which to address governmental spending pressures. And for state governments, those spending pressures continue to accelerate at levels well in excess of any overall economic growth, particularly in the area of healthcare, which typically represents almost a third of state budgets, in part for employees and retirees, but even more so for medical assistance programs and the typical state role in funding those programs, which has become almost the Pac-Man of state budgets, chewing up available resources. And those trends are not abating, even as revenues remain weak. So as a result, there are still immediate fiscal challenges across the states, and to some degree structural challenges. So with that overview, just to take a little bit of a deeper pass on some of these issues. The recession that we have experienced in recent years did bottom out in 2009, but it was more than twice as long and by many measures more than twice as deep as some of the recent recessions that preceded it. And accordingly, the folks who do the dating of recessions have been very clear when they indicated that the trough was reached in 2009, and at the same time saying that economic conditions since that month have not been favorable, and the economy, this doesn't mean that the economy has returned to operating at a normal capacity. And you see that really starkly in the graph on slide 5, which shows the cumulative job losses since the recession began nationally in 2007. We are still down by nearly 7 million jobs since the recession began. And if you look at those bars on the chart, you can see they do begin to tick up in recent months. There has been some positive growth, some signs of recovery, but we are at the same time very much still in a very deep hole, with the most recent national unemployment data indicating 9% levels, without even counting the underemployed and folks who've given up on entering the workforce. And here in Pennsylvania, while we're a little bit better in terms of the unemployment rate than the nation as a whole, we're still well above the pre-recession levels as well. And turning to slide 6, the graphic here gives a sense of how long it can take to regain a healthy labor market when you've experienced the kind of recession that we have. What you see on those different line charts across the top part of the graph are the experience of the nation in terms of employment levels in the last recessions experienced by the country in the 70s, the 90s, 2001. And with each of those lines, you see that as it dips below the x-axis, we've lost jobs. As it moves out across the timeline, you see how many months it took from the start of the last recession from the start of each recession, for the economy to regain the jobs that have been lost. And even with much shallower economic downturns of much shorter duration, it typically took 3 to 4 years for the economy to replace the jobs that had been lost. What you see in the bottommost line on that same chart, in red, if you can see the colors, is the recession that we are still recovering from, which cost us many more jobs and will take us, again, that much longer to dig out of. According to the economists, economic literature, it takes about 120,000 new jobs a month just to keep unemployment rates steady, all other things being equal, to accommodate new entrants into the labor market. To reduce the unemployment rate by 1 percentage point, you'd need to grow jobs by approximately 300,000 a month for a full year. And based on the most recent job production data, we are seeing some positive signs, but only 244,000 jobs were created. It's going to take years to get back to where we were. As the Federal Reserve Chair said earlier this calendar year, at this rate of improvement, it could take 4 to 5 more years for the job market to normalize fully. That's the labor market coming out of the recession. What you see here on slide 7 is the housing market and the collapse of the housing bubble in the economy in the recent years. And we are still down over 30% from 2006 highs in home prices across the nation. And with housing prices, we're really not yet seeing any meaningful recovery. Really kind of plateauing. The most recent January and February data has been pretty weak. And while this is less of an issue for state budgets directly, it's more of a challenge for local governments that rely on real estate taxes. The wealth effects of consumers who don't perceive that they have the value in their home that they so recently felt they had. Those homeowners whose budgets are strained because their mortgages are underwater are facing weaker spending capacity. And that in turn does affect sales taxes that are a significant part of state budgets. And what you see on slide 8 is across the country where states get their money. The largest slice of the pie in red, over 40% of the typical state budget is income taxes. The next biggest slice in blue is the sales tax, nearly a third of state budgets. Both, along with corporate taxes as well, which are another healthy slice of the pie, are economically sensitive sources of revenues. And they are sources that are being buffeted by the continuing lingering after effects shown on the preceding slides. Income taxes will tend to track employment levels and wage growth. Again, those are lagging indicators when the economy starts to heat up again. And sales tax receipts are dampened by the consumer sentiment that's been eroded by the housing market collapse. And then on top of that, as I'll touch on in a minute, the federal assistance has provided some relief in recent years. It is fading away. But if you turn to slide 9, you can see the state's own tax revenues, independent of the federal assistance. And this graph looks a lot like the one I showed you earlier with regard to employment levels. The upper lines on the chart are prior recessions. It shows how many years it took from the start of those prior shallower recessions for state revenues to regain their pre-recession levels. And the red line at the bottom of the graphic represents where we are with this downturn, where we're still, as of the fourth quarter of 2010, below 2007 levels across the states for tax receipts, even without adjusting in any way for inflation. We're 3 years out from the start of the recession, and as you can see, still have a long way to go just to get back to where we were. And with